Thanks a lot, Ray. So here we are in Harmoni, and as Ray promised, I'm going to take us through two examples, exception examples. One based on New Zealand and the other based on what is it that makes us as research professionals better off or worse off now compared to pre-pandemic. So this first analysis I'm going to do is looking at region and wave, and I really want to have a look at the key variable in this study, which is the happiness. So I'm going to set a filter of happiness and set the percentages so that they tell us what percentage of insights professionals in each country for each wave are reporting those top two happiness boxes. I'm going to turn significant differences on first of all so we can see if any of the differences are significant, and indeed there are two. Our colleagues in India are reporting lower levels of happiness between wave 1 and 2, and our friends in the UK higher levels. And they both look like they are differences of substance, to Ray's point. Let me just check that by adding the differences in here. And we can see that absolutely yes, 16 percentage points down in India, 12 percentage points up in the UK. These are differences of significance. What I really want to see here though is what's going on here in New Zealand. And to do that, I'm going to rank the table by wave 2, and we see that we here, the researchers in New Zealand, are reporting the highest levels of happiness across all of these regions. And the real question is, what is it that differentiates us from everybody else? Now, to answer that question, I can do that quite easily, simply by asking the Harmoni to discover everything there is about our selected group here in New Zealand from Ray's NewMR survey here. So if I click on that, it does a discover run. Now I no longer need to have a happy filter, and I need my percentages to be based on the region, since that's at the top of the table. I also know that some of these questions were asked only of wave 1 and some only of wave 2. So I need to make sure that my percentages are based on just those respondents who qualify for each question or each variable, in which case I'll choose total qualified. Now all my percentages are correct and appropriate. So what the Discover table tells us about us here in New Zealand is that we are more likely to be working from home, that we are working similar hours compared to before, and that our income is about the same as it was before. Now, two of those, the income and the hours worked, are differences of substance, according to Ray's rule of thumb. And so those are the two that I really want to look into. The fact that everything else seems to be going downhill, but for us here in New Zealand, for more of us than everywhere else, things are about the same, and that feels good. It makes us happy. Now, if we want to really see New Zealand in the context of the rest of the world, we should compare New Zealand with the rest of the world. And we can do that in Discover simply by adding all of the other regions and countries to the analysis. I'll just add that in there. And we'll expand our screen again. There we go. So what we now see is that same list of items that positively differentiate researchers in New Zealand from everybody else. But we also see which other countries and regions are the most similar to those of us here in New Zealand. And you can see that Canada is the most similar, then the USA, then the UK, and so on. So they have similar characteristics to us here in New Zealand. Over on the right-hand side of the table are those regions or countries that are least similar, including our friends in India, which we saw had taken a dip in happiness between the two waves. So let's make them the target and have a look at what differentiates them. So in India, and I'm going to add the differences back in here again, these are all really big differences, as well as being statistically significant. And this statistical significance is based on Bayesian statistics. What really differentiates them is that they are in big companies, that they are working more hours, and also that they were, back in wave 1, optimistic about how the length of the disruption due to the pandemic. I'm going to have a look at one more country, and that's Australia. So it stands to reason, or you would think, that given that they are just across the Tasman from us here in New Zealand, and New Zealand and Australia were seen to have handled the pandemic in similarly effective ways, that things would be about the same. But look at this. The thing that most differentiates our colleagues in Australia from everyone else is that they are worse off. Now, and I should also add that their income is lower than it was pre-pandemic. So this is a nice segue into the second part of my story, and that is, what is it that makes researchers believe that they are materially worse off or better off since pre-pandemic? And to do that, let's have a look at more of Ray's survey. So in wave 2, there was two questions asked about working fewer hours and income, or fewer or more hours and income lower or higher compared to before the pandemic. I want to drill into that. First of all, though, I want to find out what is it that's driving happiness. And to do that, I'm going to use Discover again. I'll drag the happiness variable into the Discover. And this tells us that this is profiling happy now, those of us who are happy, that working from home suits. There's a lot of people working from home, and there is a slightly higher percentage who say that it suits. That things have not changed an awful lot since the pandemic started in terms of income, and the same for working hours. So the same for us here in New Zealand. The things have not changed. That tends to make us feel a little bit happier. On the other hand, what is differentiating our sad colleagues from everybody else is that income is lower. Working from home does not suit, or in fact might not be working at all. And again, here is that worse off that we saw for Australia. So it seems that there's a really strong relationship between working hours, income, and whether or not a researcher is happy. So got us to thinking. Let's have a look at the relationship between working hours and income separately by region, and then we'll have a look at a combination of the two. To do that, we'll start with hours. I want to see how this varies by region, so we'll cross that by region. Now, we'll graph it. I think it's easier to see this in a graph as a stacked bar chart. Now, because I've only chosen some of the elements here, we need the percentages to be based on just these three elements here, and I can do that by changing my percentage to just those respondents who are included in the analysis. And here we are, and I'm also going to rank this by one of the elements, in this case working fewer hours, so that it's easier to see the pattern. And in this case, the pattern is that there is quite a difference between those countries and regions on the left and those on the right in terms of whether or not people are working more or fewer hours. In India, we know are relatively unhappy, are working more hours, significantly so, and fewer of them are working fewer hours. But New Zealand is also in that right-hand side. And in fact, New Zealand, Canada, two relatively happy countries, are mixed up with Australia and India, two relatively unhappy countries. So we're looking at an influencer of happiness, but probably not the main driver. Let's have a look now at income. And we can do that simply by replacing hours with income. Once again, we will rank the table by one of the elements, in this case lower, so we can see the pattern. And now we've got what looks to be a much stronger relationship between the variable income and the countries we know to be on the happy side of the scale. New Zealand is right there, Canada, significantly more likely to be about the same in terms of the income before pre-pandemic. And on the other side, we've got Australia right down here, on much more likely to have a lower income. One of the things we noticed here is that there also seemed to be a real mismatch. So in India, for example, we saw that there are 50%, half of our colleagues in India are on a lower income, but very few of them are doing less hours, and a lot of them, in fact, are doing more hours. And that made us think that there are people in India who are materially worse off. In other words, they're working more and getting paid less. we thought it would be an idea to create a variable that quantified that, and we've done it. We've called it status, and we've defined those who are better off as those who are working less or the same and getting paid more. Those that are worse off are those who are working more and getting paid less. I won't go into the detailed definitions, but it's simply an interaction between the number of hours worked and the income. So if I take this variable and replace my income one, and for this one, I don't want to graph the whole thing. What I want to do is just look at the average line. What we did was assign an average of, I'm going to make this 0 decimal places. We made the better off 100 a value of 100, worse off a value of minus 100, and this average line tells us exactly who is what the average better off, worse off value is for each country or region. I'm going to rank it so that the least worse off comes to the left, and if I graph that now as a bar chart, you can see we've got quite a range from North and West Europe, who are the least worst off, across to Australia and India, who are the most worse off, using that formula of the interaction between income and hours worked. Now, the big story in this chart is that everybody, even those who are least impacted in North and West Europe, everybody is on the negative side of the scale, so less than 0. But there is also a really big difference between those who are least impacted and those who are most impacted. There's a lot of things that we could drill down on here, but I'm going to leave it at that and hand back to Ray. Thank you.